Hello everybody, welcome to my channel.
Alan Bates was one of Britain's most distinguished and versatile actors, known for his intense emotional range, subtle intelligence, and the quiet magnetism that made him a leading figure in both stage and screen for over 4 decades. Born on February 17, 1934, in Allestree, Derbyshire, England, Alan Arthur Bates grew up in a working-class family with artistic inclinations. His early interest in drama was nurtured by his mother, a pianist, and he went on to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, where his natural talent and inner fire quickly became apparent. Bates began his professional acting career in the 1950s, joining the English stage company at London's Royal Court Theatre, a place that revolutionized post-war British theatre with its raw, realistic storytelling. It was there that he starred in John Osborne's groundbreaking play Look Back in Anger, 1956, which marked the arrival of the "angry young man" movement in British drama. Bates' performance captured the restless energy and frustration of a new generation, setting the tone for his entire career, one defined by sensitivity, rebellion, and emotional honesty. In the 1960s, Bates made an effortless transition to film, earning widespread acclaim for A Kind of Loving, 1962, Whistle Down the Wind, 1961, and Zorba the Greek, 1964, where he played the English writer who becomes the quiet counterpart to Anthony Quinn's exuberant Zorba. Bates' screen presence was unique, introspective, sensual, and understated. He often played conflicted men caught between passion and restraint, intellect and emotion. His collaborations with directors like Ken Russell, Lindsay Anderson, and John Schlesinger defined an era of bold, psychological British cinema. In Women in Love, 1969, based on D.H. Lawrence's novel, Bates delivered one of his most memorable performances opposite Oliver Reed and Glenda Jackson. The film's controversial nude wrestling scene between Bates and Reed became iconic, a moment that broke cinematic taboos while symbolizing the raw physical and spiritual intensity of their friendship. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Bates continued to alternate between stage and screen, excelling in roles that explored complex moral and emotional landscapes. He earned an Academy Award nomination for The Fixer, 1968, in which he portrayed a Jewish man wrongfully imprisoned in Tsarist Russia, and received multiple BAFTA and Emmy nominations over his career. On television, he appeared in critically acclaimed productions such as An Englishman Abroad, 1983, and The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1978, showcasing his ability to inhabit characters with deep humanity and vulnerability. Bates' personal life, though private, was marked by profound emotional depth. He married actress Victoria Ward in 1970, and the couple had twin sons, Benedict and Tristan. The family endured tragedy when Tristan died of an asthma attack in 1990, followed by Victoria's death from a heart condition in 1992, losses that deeply affected Bates. Friends and colleagues often remarked that his later performances carried a poignant sadness, a quiet reflection of his inner life. Even in his later years, Bates continued to command the stage and screen. He appeared in films such as Gosford Park, 2001, where his subtlety added texture to Robert Altman's intricate ensemble, and in the romantic drama The Sum of All Things, the story of Alan Bates. His real-life story inspired admiration for his endurance and artistry. Alan Bates passed away on December 27, 2003, from pancreatic cancer, at the age of 69. His legacy endures as that of an actor who refused to be categorized, equally convincing as hero or outsider, lover or loner, realist or dreamer. He brought to every role a sense of truth, emotional intelligence, and quiet rebellion that helped redefine modern British acting. Alan Bates' stage career was as vital and celebrated as his work on screen, perhaps even more so, for it was in the theatre that he felt most alive and most connected to the essence of performance. After his early success at the Royal Court Theatre, Bates became one of the defining actors of Britain's theatrical renaissance during the 1950s and 1960s, alongside contemporaries like Albert Finney, Tom Courtenay, and Peter O'Toole. He embodied the spirit of the time, working-class intelligence fused with poetic intensity, and brought to the stage a rare blend of vulnerability and strength. He performed with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre, taking on roles that spanned from Shakespearean heroes to modern anti-heroes. Bates' interpretation of Hamlet in 1969 was particularly acclaimed for its introspective tone. He played the Danish prince not as a tortured intellectual, but as a deeply feeling, quietly rebellious soul. In The Caretaker by Harold Pinter, Bates found a perfect match for his subtle style of acting, the play's silences, ambiguities, and shifting power dynamics mirrored his own instinct for restraint and emotional suggestion. His collaboration with playwrights such as Pinter and David Story resulted in some of his most profound work. In Story's Home, 1970, performed opposite John Gielgud, Bates brought aching humanity to a damaged man living in an institution, revealing the hidden pain beneath ordinary conversation. The production was hailed as a masterpiece of understated emotion, with critics describing Bates' performance as a study in broken dignity. Bates' acting philosophy was rooted in authenticity and intuition. He rejected overt theatricality and preferred a natural, organic approach. He often spoke about how he tried to let the character live through me, rather than act through the character. His performances felt lived in, as if the characters had existed long before the curtain rose or the camera rolled. This quiet truthfulness made him both a thinking actor and a profoundly emotional one. Despite his fame, Bates never pursued celebrity. He valued artistic integrity over stardom, often turning down high-profile roles that didn't resonate with him emotionally. Colleagues described him as gentle, private, and contemplative, someone who found solace in literature, painting, and nature. Yet beneath that calm exterior was an actor of extraordinary courage, willing to expose his soul in front of an audience. In the 1980s and 1990s, he continued to take on challenging roles in film and television, often exploring themes of loss, identity, and moral ambiguity. His performance in An Englishman Abroad, 1983, playing the exiled spy Guy Burgess opposite Coral Brown, was widely praised for its nuanced portrayal of loneliness and faded charm. In We Think the World of You, 1988, he played a middle-aged man entangled in a complex love triangle, balancing tenderness and frustration with heartbreaking precision. Bates also became a mentor and inspiration to younger actors. Many of his peers and successors, including Daniel Day-Lewis, Ralph Fiennes, and Gary Oldman, have cited him as an influence, admiring his commitment to emotional honesty and depth. By the time of his death in 2003, Alan Bates had accumulated an extraordinary body of work that defied easy classification. He had moved seamlessly between film, television, and theater, between Shakespeare and modern drama, between heroism and fragility. His legacy lies not only in his performances but in the way he redefined what it meant to be a British actor, thoughtful yet passionate, grounded yet daring. He belonged to that rare generation of performers who made art feel personal and immediate, transforming every role into a mirror of human truth. In the later stages of his career, Alan Bates entered a period of profound artistic maturity. a time when his performances carried an even deeper emotional resonance. The experiences of personal tragedy and the loss of loved ones seemed to deepen his connection to the complex souls he portrayed. Bates often spoke little about his private grief, but it radiated through his work, infusing his characters with a kind of quiet melancholy and wisdom that audiences felt deeply, even when he played men of few words. During the 1990s and early 2000s, Bates remained active across film, television, and stage. His performance in Love in a Cold Climate, 2001, and his turn as the dignified butler Jennings in Robert Altman's Gosford Park, 2001, introduced his artistry to a new generation. In Gosford Park, his subtle gestures and understated expression, a mere flicker of the eyes or a pause between sentences, spoke volumes about class, loyalty, and restraint. Altman later said that Bates brought a sense of history to the ensemble, grounding the film's intricate social dynamics in lived emotion. One of his most haunting late performances was in the television adaptation of The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1978, often revived and celebrated well into the 1990s, in which he portrayed Thomas Hardy's tragic protagonist Michael Henchard. Bates perfectly captured the character's inner turmoil, a man consumed by pride, regret, and the consequences of his own decisions. Critics considered it one of the finest performances of his career, a culmination of his lifelong fascination with flawed humanity. Bates also earned acclaim for An Englishman Abroad, 1983, written by Alan Bennett, and A Day in the Death of Joe Egg, on stage, which displayed his remarkable ability to balance humor and heartbreak. He received multiple BAFTA nominations throughout his life and was knighted in 2003. Just months before his passing, an honor that acknowledged his immeasurable contribution to British culture. Even as illness overtook him, Bates continued to act with grace and commitment. His colleagues described him as fearlessly dedicated, always the first to arrive at rehearsal and the last to leave. He viewed acting not as performance but as empathy, an act of human understanding. The job, he once said, is to find the truth in people, even when they can't see it themselves. Beyond his professional achievements, those who knew Bates personally remembered him as deeply kind, reflective, and quietly rebellious. He valued solitude, often escaping to the countryside or the coast to read and paint. He had a deep appreciation for the arts, music, and poetry, especially D.H. Lawrence, whose explorations of sensuality and spirit resonated with Bates's own artistic temperament. After his death on December 27, 2003, tributes poured in from across the world. Glenda Jackson, his co-star in Women in Love, called him a man of immense depth and compassion. The Guardian described him as a performer who could express an entire emotional landscape with a single glance. The Royal National Theatre, where he had performed some of his greatest stage work, held a memorial service celebrating his life's artistry, attended by generations of actors who had grown up inspired by him. Alan Bates left behind not just an extraordinary body of work but a philosophy of acting that continues to influence British theatre and cinema, the idea that truth, vulnerability, and empathy are more powerful than showmanship. His legacy is one of emotional honesty, an actor who gave himself completely to his craft, and in doing so, helped audiences understand the beauty and pain of being human. Alan Bates' influence on modern British acting cannot be overstated. He was part of a generation that fundamentally redefined what it meant to be an actor in post-war Britain, breaking away from the declamatory style of classical theatre and bringing a new realism, emotional depth, and psychological complexity to both stage and screen. Alongside contemporaries such as Albert Finney, Tom Courtenay, Richard Burton, and Peter O'Toole, Bates helped usher in an age of authenticity, where vulnerability became as powerful as grandeur. Critics often described him as an actor of quiet revolution. He wasn't flamboyant or attention-seeking. Instead, he practiced a kind of emotional transparency that made audiences feel as though they were watching a real person rather than a character. His performances were built on observation, empathy, and intuition. Directors frequently remark that he never acted at a scene, he lived inside it. That quality influenced an entire generation of actors, including Daniel Day-Lewis, Gary Oldman, Jeremy Irons, Ralph Fiennes, and Colin Firth, all of whom have acknowledged their debt to Bates' naturalistic and emotionally fearless approach. One of the most remarkable aspects of Bates' influence is how he bridged the gap between classical and contemporary performance. He was as comfortable in the psychological realism of modern playwrights like Harold Pinter and David Story as he was in the poetic language of Shakespeare or the moral weight of Hardy and Lawrence. He understood that truth could exist in many forms, in silence as much as in speech, in a flicker of the eye as much as in a monologue. Bates also inspired many directors, writers, and dramatists, who admired his ability to bring complex interior lives to the screen. Ken Russell, who directed him in Women in Love, 1969, and The Rainbow, 1989, called him a painter in flesh, a man who could use stillness as color. Lindsay Anderson, another close collaborator, saw Bates as a poet of understatement, capable of expressing tenderness and rage within the same breath. Even decades after his passing, critics continue to re-examine Bates' body of work for its emotional intelligence and timelessness. In A Kind of Loving and Whistle Down the Wind, he embodied the restless spirit of post-war working-class Britain, men torn between tradition and desire. In The Fixer, he became the moral conscience of an unjust world, and in Women in Love, he turned eroticism and philosophy into art. His characters often carried deep internal conflicts, which Bates portrayed without judgment. He understood that human beings were messy, flawed, and beautiful in their contradictions. Beyond performance, Bates' life and choices also represented a quiet resistance to the commercialization of art. He was known to turn down lucrative Hollywood offers, preferring the intimacy and artistic challenge of British theatre and film. His refusal to conform to celebrity culture, combined with his deep commitment to storytelling, made him something of a spiritual figure among serious actors, a reminder that the purpose of acting was not fame, but truth. He was knighted in 2003, an honor that came near the end of his life but symbolized a nation's gratitude for his contribution to culture. His final years were marked by illness, but he continued to work until he could no longer do so, driven by a quiet passion that defined his entire existence. Today, Alan Bates is remembered not only through his films but also through the Alan Bates Award, established by the Actors Centre in London, which supports emerging actors who embody his values of artistry, humility, and integrity. The award ensures that his spirit lives on in future generations, a fitting legacy for a man who believed that acting was not about imitation, but about understanding humanity from the inside out. Ultimately, Alan Bates' enduring influence rests in his belief that acting is an act of empathy. He once said, "What we do is try to understand people, their fears, their dreams, their loneliness, and give it back to them in a way that makes them feel less alone." That belief, simple yet profound, is why his performances still move audiences decades later. Alan Bates' relationships and collaborations were at the heart of his creative life. They shaped not only the trajectory of his career but also the texture of his art. While he was often described as private and introspective, those who worked with him spoke of a deep emotional generosity and quiet intensity that drew others in. He formed lifelong artistic bonds with several playwrights, directors, and fellow actors, each relationship revealing a different dimension of his personality and craft. His early years at the Royal Court Theatre introduced him to playwrights like John Osborne and Harold Pinter, both of whom changed the face of British drama. Bates' performance in Osborne's Look Back in Anger helped ignite the "angry young man" movement, a cultural wave that gave voice to post-war disillusionment and working-class frustration. Bates, with his quiet charisma and emotional volatility, became its spiritual symbol. But while his peers often played these roles with overt anger, Bates added introspection, a sense of sadness beneath the rebellion. His collaboration with Harold Pinter was equally significant. Pinter's writing, full of pauses, ambiguity, and emotional undercurrents, found its perfect vessel in Bates' subtle performance style. In The Collection and The Caretaker, Bates revealed an extraordinary ability to make silence eloquent. He understood that what mattered in Pinter's plays wasn't what was said, but what was withheld. Their creative partnership was built on mutual respect. Pinter once said, "Allen could play anything because he never pushed, he listened." In film, Bates' partnership with director Ken Russell was one of the most electrifying of his career. Their collaboration on Women in Love, 1969, was a turning point not just for Bates but for British cinema itself. The film's sensuality, physicality, and philosophical depth challenged traditional notions of masculinity and intimacy. Bates' willingness to fully commit to emotionally and physically exposed scenes, particularly the famous wrestling sequence with Oliver Reed, demonstrated his courage and artistic integrity. Russell later said that Bates was fearless in the
Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.